Welcome, all of you. And as you see, we'll talk about the new rules and we'll focus on some experience that we have had so far. Let me see. So my name is Robert Andersson. I'm head of negotiations at SULF, and I also work quite a lot with these issues about migration, social insurance, and so on. And SULF, we are the professional associations for teachers, researchers, and doctoral candidates. We have over 22,000 members. We have no connections to political parties, and we are one of the unions within the Swedish Confederation of Professional Associations that organize academics in Sweden. And as a member in SULF, you can get a lot of advice and support on various matters. We have included an income insurance policy. I will say a few words about that in the end. You can get advice and support on matters of labor law, collective agreements. We have a lot of information material, and you can also access insurances, loans, and other things with a discount. So today, as I said, we will focus on what we have learned so far regarding the new rules in practice, and not least what we have learned regarding status as long-term resident. That is one way to get permanent residency. And in the previous webinars, we have focused quite a lot about the new rules, and in this at this time we will not say very much about that. So if you are interested to learn more, you can go back and look at the recorded webinars and also our FAQ at our webpage. So today we will talk about permanent residency, the rules and experience about that. And then we will talk quite a lot about status as long-term resident, which has turned out to be a good alternative way to get permanent residency. And we are happy to have two persons with us here today that will talk about their cases. I will say a few words about what happens, the rules for those of you who happen to be citizens of another country within the European Union and or a relative to such a person. As those rules are much different, and also about temporary residence permit as an alternative if you cannot get permanent residency, and also what to do while you are waiting for a decision from Migrationsverket, and the impact of the new rules that came into effect yesterday regarding residence permit for work. And then say a few words about unemployment benefit, as that is important in many ways, but one reason is that it's a way to fulfill the income requirement for status as long-term resident. So as you know, there are two ways to get permanent residency. One is through an application directly for permanent residency, which used to be the main route. The other route is to go through an application for long-term residency. And here, as I said, two persons will talk about their experience after receiving a positive decision for long-term residency. So if we start with the application for permanent residency, you need to have a residence permit for 4 years. That should be within a time period of 7 years, so you can have gaps in between, and you can count residence permit for work, for research, or for doctoral studies, and if required you can add those to each other. So if you have 2 years for work, for example, and 2 years for research, they can add up to 4 years, and you will fulfill that requirement. Then you should have an intention to stay in Sweden. You should have shown good conduct. And the new thing that came up this summer, which created all the problems we have seen, is the income requirement, that you must have an income from an employment or from an own company, and that should last for 18 months at the time when the Migrationsverket takes their decision. And this was not at all a requirement before last summer. Also, it's not recommended to apply for permanent residency this way until it's at most 14 days left on your current residence permit, and that's because Migrationsverket say that you cannot have two residence permits at the same time. But you should, of course, always apply before the residence permit runs out. That's very important. In this case, there is no fixed time limit for a decision, and we can see the handling times are rather long, unfortunately. But we'll come back to that with time limits when we come to status as long-term resident. Now there are a few things to be explored in this area, and one thing is of course, because Migrationsverket, they have made their interpretation, and one of that is of course that you should have an income for 18 months, but also that it should be at the time of the decision and not at the time for application, or the time point that is best for you. And this is something that could be challenged in an appeal to a court. Also, the 18 months as such, is that in accordance with what in the legislation is mentioned as in Swedish viss varaktighet, that the income should be of viss varaktighet. Also, we have seen some problems with trial employments or future employment, if that will be considered or not. And when it comes to trial employments, we can see that they are often not considered that much. And we've also seen that where upcoming employments, even though you have a signed contract, also was not counted. Also, common question is what happens when you have visits abroad? How will that impact? And that could also be a problem when you apply for permanent residency. So in summary, we need more guiding decisions from the courts after appeals to negative decisions. So the other route how to get permanent residency is through an application for long-term residency. And long-term residency, those rules are based on an EU directive. It was implemented already in 2005. And there were no changes made in this regulation in during last year. And this was the route that we recommended already when we saw the problems, the upcoming problems with permanent residency, and you will understand why soon. As I said, it has been around for some time. It has not been much used, as it has been much easier to get permanent residency through the other route. But we have had cases also before when members have got long-term residency through or permanent residency through the long-term residency. So it was not new to us, but it has turned out to be a good alternative. In this case, the requirement is that you should have been in Sweden for 5 years, and you should have a residence permit that could qualify for permanent residency. And such residence permit, of course, can be for work, for research and doctoral studies. And they can be, of course, combined as well. But it should be 5 years consecutive, so no gaps. Other residence permits that could qualify for permanent residency could be, for example, if you have been family member to someone in Sweden. Unfortunately, Migrationsverket tells us that residence permit to apply for a job for 1 year after you have after graduation or completed time as researcher will not qualify, but that's also something that could be challenged in court. Also here, time with right of residence, that's something that you have as an EU citizen, or if you're a relative, and also some British citizens that lived here before Brexit. that time can also be counted as qualification time. In this case, you are not allowed to stay abroad more than 6 months at a time and not more than 10 months in total during these 5 years. So here it's quite clear, that rule is quite clear in this case. There is an economical requirement that must be met also here. And it basically says that you should not be dependent on certain social benefits for your economy. This means that incomes from benefits that are related to low income will not be counted. But that means also that other benefits that are not directly related to low income, that is paid more in general to, for example, as you see further down here, child allowance, barnbidrag, that benefit can be counted because it's given to all parents, no matter what income you have. This opens for other incomes to be counted than if you compare to when you apply directly for permanent residency. In this case, you can count salaries, of course, and income from own company, but you can also count unemployment benefits. You can count benefits from social security system that are not related to a low income, stipends for research, for example, and even if you have a relative with an income that can support your needs. So here there are more openings when it comes to the financial requirement. Another advantage with this is that you can apply at any time, also when you have a valid residence permit. So you don't have to wait until it's about to run out if you have been here for 5 years. Here, a decision is supposed to be taken within 6 months after application. We can see that that's not always the case, but at least there is such a regulation in this case. And if you are granted status as long-term resident, you're also automatically given a permanent residence permit without any further requirements. And this long-term residency also gives you the possibility to move to most other countries within the European Union and live there and work there. So you can say this is a kind of a permanent residency plus. So if we summarize from these parts, our experience so far is that application for status as long-term long-term residency is the way to go if possible. Such an application will also be considered as an application for permanent residency if you don't already hold permanent residency, and that means that you have sort of nothing to lose to go through this route. If you do not fulfill the requirement for long-term residency, if you have not been here for 5 years or you have gaps or so between your residence permits, you can apply for permanent residency only, or you can wait until you fulfill the requirement through a temporary permit that will count as qualification time for long-term residency. Even no matter if you apply for one or the other, you are allowed to stay in Sweden, and you're also allowed to work here while you are waiting for a decision. When you apply, it's important that you tell Migrationsverket that you want a temporary residence permit. If you want so, of course, for the event that you are not granted permanent residency. The experience so far is quite positive when it comes to how they handle the income requirement for this long-term residency. And it seems that also a previous income over time is of important. So if you have had an income, which you of course have had to get your previous permits, then that is also very important. And then they can, seems that they can, based on that, assume that you will have an income also in the future. So now we are happy to have two persons with us today that will tell you about their cases regarding long-term residency. And we have Hassan and Musen. I hope that was the right pronunciation. And and you have got the decision, as we can see here, that a positive decision, and we congratulate you for that. And it's very interesting to hear about your experience and what you did in order to get this decision. So please, Hassan, you can start.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. And hello, everyone. My name is Hassan, and I will share my experience with you today for my application for long-term residency. At first, I will start a little bit with a bit of background. I started with master's in Sweden here, but in 2016, I started a research, a guest researcher contract. So I got a residence permit through that. That means by June 2021, I finished 5 years of combined residence permit under PhD and this researcher permit. By September 2021, my residence permit has ended. That's the beginning of, I think, 3rd of September. And by December 2021, I defended my PhD. And before I defended my PhD, I had an agreement with KTH that I will continue for a research job that has a fixed term that will end in June 2023. So my application process went that, if I can go to the next slide. So my application is processed that in August 2021, I applied for permanent residency because I was not extremely sure about the long-term residence status. I was reading about it and everything. And after a while, when I saw that the waiting times are long, so maybe my contract will not be enough by the time they make the decision, or I'm not sure how Migrationsverket will deal with it. So in October 2021, I applied for long-term residence status. But I have to point out here that I recommend everyone to apply before the permit ends, because I saw that in the letter, they pointed that out, that I applied a bit late. So it might not be as guaranteed as we think. So next, I will talk about what I used to apply for this long-term residence status. And for that, I had a number of documents that I sent. First, I used the previous and current PhD contract that I had, and the previous research contract. So I showed them where was my income for the 5 years, the previous 5 years. And I also used the employment letter for the current research position that I hold now. And that's because at the time I didn't have the contract for it. And that's because I didn't finish my PhD by the time I applied. So and when I got the contract, I sent it to Migrationsverket directly. And also I had a certificate of membership from ACASA. But here, I think maybe if Robert later can elaborate, because maybe we can also get a certificate of membership if you are part of union, because I'm part of SULF. So maybe that would also supplement the application. I also sent the salary slips for the previous 3 months. And I also sent them lease agreement for the apartment and latest rent invoice with the utilities so they can see what costs for my tenancy. I also sent the table showing my stays outside of Sweden. And I also sent the passport stamps so they can verify my stays outside of Sweden. And when the 6 months have reached, I sent the request to conclude, and that was at the 8th of April. And I sent the updated salary slips, so I sent them again. And I received a positive decision about 4 weeks later that granted me long-term residency and also permanent residency in Sweden. So that's my experience. And if you have questions directed to me, you can also write in the chat. And if I can answer them, I will answer them during the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Hassan. And
Thank you.
then we can conclude here that you did not have 18 months employment at the time of decision, so that is apparently not a requirement here,
Yes.
as we already knew, but it's nice to see that it works in practice.
Yeah.
And on your questions about certificate or membership, of course, you can get certificate from us for the membership to show that you are entitled also to compensation from the income insurance that I will talk about later. So,
Yeah.
so that's something can be added, because then you can get higher compensation, and that can help you to fulfill this requirement.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you again, and then
Thank you.
let me see. Now we have a next person, and I show your picture here, and you can tell about your story.
Yes, I'm trying to turn on my camera too. The host disabled it. Yes, is it? Yeah, brilliant. Hello everyone, I'm Mohsen, and this slide is, I only have one slide. It does have 7 animation features, but it does tell a lot of a story. It does tell 11 months of my life story, I have to say. So on August 20th last year, I applied for, if you just press, I think it's just gonna make a little animation on it in this slide. I applied for the permanent residency, which was when I applied for the permanent residency on the website after the 4 years of my PhD, the information on Migrationsverket was not updated on the website. So it was all the original information that you just apply after 4 years, and you have to apply within 14 days before your current residency expire. And you just have a contract and a letter from a supervisor. So that 18 months was not updated on the website when I applied. I applied, and then of course a couple of days later the news came out, and I had to wait until February 11th until I get the decision. The decision was they rejected my permanent residency, even though I had the contract until end of June 2022. I got only visa until mid-June 2022, because in my letter of support from university was written that his contract ends end of June, but he should be finished with his education and transferring knowledge by the 14th of June. So joining a couple of SULF workshop, I get to know there is a possibility to apply for a long-term residency, and I applied for the long-term residency. If you press, let's go to the next one, on 5th of October 2021, while I was waiting. So my current resident permit was expired in September. I had an ongoing application with Migrationsverket for my permanent residency, which I registered in August. And on October 5th, I just sent the documents required for long-term residency, which Hassan was presenting it very neatly. So all of those documents. With addition, I had a certificate from SULF as well that was suggesting I'm a SULF member, and I am entitled, in the possible cases, I'm entitled to get the unemployment benefit. 6 months later, if you press one more time, on April 6th, we sent a letter by a suggestion from Robert SULF. I sent a letter to conclude my case after 6 months. A couple of weeks later, I received a letter that they want additional information, which was exactly the information I provided before. So we just formulate the information one more time, and we packed it together in one single PDF, and we emailed it. By we, I mean because I actively shared this information and update with Robert and SULF, and he did offer a helping hand. And also the university lawyer, I have his permission to use his name, Leif Eriksson. After we submit all of this document, I received a letter from my case officer that my case is complicated and they cannot conclude the case within the framework of 4 weeks. I'm getting a little bit emotional and passionate here, but this is a case. Me as an international, when I saw that letter, I had no hopes in the system, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to wait. But I shared this again with Robert and SULF, and he suggested that the reasoning that why my case is complicated, why they cannot conclude my case is not sensible. So let's appeal to this decision. And he helped me by actually writing the appeal letter. I only had to modify it by writing my name and my personal information. And we appealed to that decision. If you press it 2 more times, the slide, yeah. We appealed on May 11th. It went to the court, the immigration court, and I received the email from immigration court in Malmo on 17th of May that my case is registered on 17th of May. And as you see here, the decision was made on May 18th, next working day. And the decision was positive. I got a long-term resident permit and a permanent resident permit, both combined together. I did not have an 18-month contract. All of my contract information and all of my document was exactly the same thing that I submitted for the permanent resident permit, and they didn't grant me the permanent resident permit before. The same document I sent for a long-term resident, and I got it granted. The only reason I came here to share my story is I shared my letter and my case with SULF and with university lawyer since beginning of March, and it ended up being very, very fruitful. Like, I wouldn't appeal to the case on May 11th, and by their motivation and by their help, I actually appealed, and it ended up being me having this permit. So knowing what I know right now, to be honest, I would never send any email or document or letter to immigration office without consulting it with university lawyer or with SULF. Even if it's a consult, even if it's a very simple consult, I will definitely do that, because my experience right now completely show that sharing this information and being open about how are you communicating with immigration doesn't matter if you share it with someone that is competent and skillful on this case. I don't have any more stuff.
Sorry, Mohsen. Something happened with your sound. So your last sentence, I couldn't hear your last sentence. So can you repeat what you said afterwards? You're happy that you talked to the university lawyer, and
I'm very happy. I'm very happy that I shared everything, every personal information, including my savings in the bank, with the university lawyer and with SULF while I was preparing document to communicate with Migrationsverket, because it ended up me getting the positive decision, the decision that I was looking for. So knowing what I know right now, I would never apply for new application or communicate with Migrationsverket without consulting it with union or university lawyer or somebody who is expert in this case, because this is really, really matters, and that does really change things. Another thing, I already applied for my Swedish citizenship, and I thought that I have to wait until my card arrive and then I'm eligible to apply or something. But no, just a simple comment from SULF was enough to tell me that they have it in the system, I can apply, so I'm eligible, apply for it, and I did it. So this is, I guess, sometimes a little bit emotional about this, because it was 11 months I was waiting for that, and I'm very happy that I shared, and I totally recommend, I'm right now recommending to all of my close friends who are internationals, PhDs and postdocs that are international, they have lived in Sweden for 4 years, more than 4 years or 3.5, and they are going to go through similar situation with me. Please share with union, please share with the university lawyer, because it is very, very important, and I'm a living example of it.
Okay, thank you very much. And if you have questions here, I guess they can be asked. and answered in Q&A, and we have to go further with the presentation. Just a few words about rules for citizens from European Union and the other countries like Norway and Iceland and so that are also under the same regulation. If you are relative to such a person that lives in Sweden. An EU EEA citizen normally has right of residence, which is something different from a residence permit. Nordic citizens do not need anything of that. If you're a relative, a family member, you also normally has right of residence. That is, if your relative has right of residence, you also have that. As a non-citizen from European Union, you should, however, apply for a residence card or in Swedish uppehållskort from Migrationsverket to show that you have right of residence. And you are free to take any job, of course. And actually, you're not supposed to get a residence permit for studies or research as a relative to such a citizen because you already have the right to work and live here through this other regulation. Although I know that some people has got it anyway. If you have been here for 5 years as a relative or such a citizen, you will get after application a permanent right of residence, which is somehow equivalent to permanent residence permit. And you don't, in this case, you don't have to meet any other requirements than have been here for 5 years with right of residence. So no, you don't have to show any income or anything. So it's this route is a bit easier for those of you that are under this regulation. So now what happens if permanent residence permit is not granted? You can still get time-limited residence permit. And there are several options here. You can, of course, get one to finish your studies or research if they are not finished. You can get a residence permit to seek an employment or to start your own company. That is given for 1 year, no more, no less. In that case, it's important that you, in your application for permanent residency or long-term residence permit, that you say that you tell them that you want such a permit if the permanent residency is not granted. Otherwise, they might not look at that possibility. Here also you need financing, but when you apply for this residence permit to seek a job, you can also count unemployment benefits, you can count savings at the bank account or such things. So this means that it's easier to fulfill that requirement. However, unfortunately, you are not allowed to apply for residence permit for studies or research when you have this type of permit to look for a job for 1 year. But during that year, you can start any job and work as long as this permit is valid. Or rather, you are not allowed to apply from Sweden. You can, of course, apply if you go abroad and apply and come back, which is very problematic. And this is something we have addressed to the politicians, that this is mistake, probably, hopefully at least it's a mistake in the legislation. And this was actually not something that was changed last summer. This has been around for some time, but it was noticed now when it became harder to get permanent residency. While you are waiting for a decision for a new residence permit or permanent residency, there are a number of things to think about. It's not a good idea to leave Sweden, as you might not be able to come back. In most cases, you are free to take any job in Sweden during this time, as you do not need a work permit. And that also means that you are entitled to unemployment benefits if you meet those requirements. And as we heard before, when you have been waiting for 6 months for any type of decision, basically, you can apply to Migrationsverket that they should take a decision in your case within 4 weeks. In that case, they can either take a final decision or take a decision that tells you that they are not able to take a decision within 4 weeks, and such a decision can, as we heard, also be appealed. And here is quite confusing, because at the form that Migrationsverket provides, they say that when you apply for long-term residency, you can ask for this already after 4 months. But we have seen cases where people that do that still get that application back, so to say, and with the explanation that you have not yet waited for 6 months, so you cannot apply for this yet. So, but we don't understand why they write 4 months in their form when they don't keep that limit. So that's something we have to sort out with them. Appeal, that's something you can do in most cases. And of course, if you are not granted any residence permit at all, not even a fixed term permit, then you can appeal. You can also appeal if you are granted a temporary residence permit, but not a permanent residence permit, if that decision is based on the fact that you do not fulfill the requirements for future income or good conduct, but not if it's based on other reasons. And always, if you apply for status as long-term resident or citizenship, those decisions can also be appealed. And as I said, a request for a decision to within 4 weeks can also be appealed if that request is not granted. So then I will say a few words, as I saw there were some questions about the new rules regarding residence permit for work that came into effect yesterday. And this was based on a proposal that was worked on for quite some time. But this new rules basically only affects those with residence permit for employments. So not if you have or will get a residence permit for studies or research. Yeah, there are a few exceptions, so I'll come to that. But so basically there is not much new for most of you here. But of course, if you get a residence permit for work in the future, or you have one today, then it can be of importance. In this, when this new legislation came, one important focus was to avoid exploitation of employees from other countries that will have to work for very low salary, or they have one salary on paper and another one in reality. So that was one focus. But apart from that, there were some new rules that will be of interest here. And one is that you can have now a residence permit for work for more than 4 years. As it used to be, you could only have it for 4 years, and after that you either got permanent residency or no residence permit at all, basically. And this of course became more problematic now when it became harder to get permanent residency. So now, if you do not fulfill the requirement for permanent residency after having residence permit for work for 4 years, you can still get a temporary residence permit and keep on working. And also the new rules makes it possible for a person with a residence permit for work to apply for residence permit for doctoral studies or research without having to leave Sweden, which was the case before. And this was actually something that the part regarding residence permit for doctoral studies was something that was added to the proposal by the government based on comments that we and other organizations sent during the process. So at first it was supposed only to be for possible to apply for residence permit for research and not for doctoral studies. So that's actually something that we managed to change, or get the politicians to change rather. And also in this regulation, there is also possibility to apply for a certain document that will make it possible for you to go abroad for certain types of travels and come back to Sweden while you are waiting for a decision. Unfortunately, that will only affect those that have applied for an extension of a residence permit for work, and not if you have applied for residence permit for doctoral studies or research. And that is also something that was raised in the process by many organizations, but the reply was that that was not within the scope of these changes, but we hope to get the change later there. Just a few words about this with residence permit for work, because it might be confusing when you have one or other type of residence permit. But residence permit for work can be issued only for up to 2 years, and also not longer than the employment lasts or longer than the date when the passport expires. The income must here be in line with collective agreement or equivalent. New is now also that you must have a signed employment contract to get this type of residence permit. And after 4 years with a residence permit or in combination with residence permit for research or doctoral studies, you can be granted permanent residency if you meet those requirements. And a difference is also, as at least it has been like that you can only apply for permanent residency at the time you apply for an extension of your residence permit for work. Then you will be asked there if you also want to be considered for permanent residency. And as we have seen before, it's hard to apply during the time you already have a valid residence permit, as you cannot have 2 residence permits at the same time. So you have to apply when your permit is about to run out. But an application for status as long-term resident will be, such an application can be sent at any time, also while you have a residence permit. And I should perhaps say that if you get a residence permit for work or for research could depend, of course, what kind of duties you have and also where you work, because it's only institutions that are approved research organizations that can be given. It's only if you work there that you can be given research residence permit for research. So of course all the universities, but also some companies are such a approved organization. But also if you work mainly with teaching, maybe you would get a residence permit for work and not for research. So that is something you have to discuss with your employer and with Migrationsverket. So I will say something about the unemployment insurance now. And one question is, of course, if it's still under the rules we have now possible to get unemployment benefit if you are in Sweden. And yes, that's the case. I would say it's usually the case. For example, if you have applied for residence permit or permanent residency, if you have a residence permit that allows you to work, for example, the one that when you are allowed to seek an employment during 1 year, and also if you have got a negative decision and you appeal, then you can still stay here and work while you are waiting for the final decision, which can take quite some time. What is important with the unemployment insurance is that it's an optional insurance. It's not mandatory and it's not automatic if you are a member in a union. So that means that you have to apply for a membership in the unemployment insurance fund. And we recommend the unemployment insurance fund for academics, academikernas a-kassa. One reason is that the fee is low there, and also they are well aware about the situation and how things work at universities. And the fee is 130 crowns per month, and from July this year, 25% of that will be returned through tax reduction the year after it's paid. And in order to become a member, you should have or have had an employment in Sweden or within the European Union. And the compensation can be given for up to 300 days of full-time unemployment or 450 days if you have children under 18. Also to get benefits, you have to fulfill some other requirements. One is that you should be a member in the unemployment insurance fund for at least 1 year before you became unemployed, and you should have worked with an employment for the last 6 months and a certain number of hours every month. And of course, you have also to be registered as a job seeker and actively look for jobs and these kind of things that are also basic requirements. And I would say perhaps it's even more important to be a member now in the unemployment insurance fund than before, because as we have seen, that this could be one way to get permanent residency through status as long-term resident. And of course, it's always important to have an income even if you will be unemployed for some time. In addition to that, we have in SULF an income insurance. The income insurance is included in the membership fee. You have to be a member with us and also with the unemployment insurance fund for 12 months in order to use the income insurance, and 12 months before the first day you will be unemployed. So you need both SULF and unemployment insurance fund. In that case, you can get up to 80% of your previous income. And you can get the additional compensation from our income insurance for 150 days. But you also can buy an additional insurance that covers another 150 days. And for that, you pay an additional fee. So here is just an illustration. If you have a salary of 40,000 before tax, you will now get about 30,000 after tax. And if you become unemployed, you may, together with the unemployment fund, get about 23,000 together with our income insurance. And without the income insurance, as you can see, you get less than what you can get if you have a membership with us and you are entitled to the income insurance. And if you buy the additional insurance, this can go on for up to 300 days. And I should say that the additional insurance must also be, you have to sign up for that at least 12 months before the first day you are unemployed. So now just a few words about what we are doing right now in order to get rules changed. So we started to debate about this already before the changes were implemented, and that was continued, of course, after that. And we have written a lot of debate articles, and some of them, of course, together with other organizations, other unions, and also employers. We have had a lot of contacts and discussions with politicians and also with Migrationsverket regarding the rules and the interpretation of the rules and the handling times at Migrationsverket and all that. As I said, cooperation with unions, student unions, employers, and also the grassroots movement that you have. And one example of an article is shown here. And we also give a lot of guidance about the rules and how to think, and we have our FAQ about that. And we of course try to get the same rules back as they used to be. One party has raised this issue in the parliament and they got some support. And there's also been some debate articles from them about this, but unfortunately there is still a majority in the parliament that did not support this initiative. Just this week, Moderaterna had an article also, but they focused there mainly on the long handling times at Migrationsverket, but we still think it's positive that they raised the issue. And we will continue to focus on the parties in the parliament and to discuss with them. And we also presented some proposals on how to change the legislation and sent that to the government and others. And we hope that they will listen to that. Although you have to, unfortunately, have some patience here because these processes tend to take some time, and we have an election upcoming this year as well. We have also updated the postdoc agreement for postdoc employments so that you can be hired up to 3 years now instead of as it used to be 2 years. So you should have an employment in that case for at least 2 years, but up to 3 years. And that will make it easier to get permanent residency, even if the handling times are quite long. And we have also recently asked for another meeting with Migrationsverket to sort out some issues that we have seen this spring. So, yeah, and the membership fees with SULF, the normal fee is 260 crowns per month. And it includes the income insurance, doctoral candidates with employment, and then you pay 125 crowns, also including income insurance, and the reduced membership fee for those with stipend is 80 crowns. You can have 2 memberships. You can have a membership with us and other unions within SACO. And remember that the unemployment fund is separate and you have to apply separately for a membership there. And that you need that membership to access our income insurance. And you are most welcome to join us as a member, and you can of course sign up at our webpage. And as a new member, you also get some other insurances for free during 3 months for accidents, life insurance, insurance for sickness, and certain diagnoses, and medical care insurance. And we cooperate with the insurance company Folksam in this case.